She was born into the ashes of war and rose to become one of the most iconic faces in film history. But behind the glamour of Sophia Loren's legendary beauty and fame lies a side of her story that the world rarely hears. Sophia battled betrayal, exile, and a pain that cut so deep it scarred her for life. In fact, she once made a decision that nearly destroyed everything she'd built, and her son was one of the few people who truly understood the cost of her sacrifices. What heartbreaking price did Sophia Loren pay for love? And why did she suddenly give up her career when the world was still calling her name? The truth is more complicated and far more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Born into chaos. Sophia Loren's journey did not begin in luxury or fame. It started in wartime Italy, in the ruins of a crumbling society and a broken family. She was born Sophia Villani Schiccoloni on September 20, 1934, in the Clinica Regina Margherita in Rome, and from the moment she entered the world, life was anything but stable. Her father, Riccardo Schiccoloni, was a man of noble descent, but that meant little to the young Sophia or her mother, Romilda Villani. Riccardo refused to marry Romilda and abandoned the family shortly after Sophia was born. He gave the baby his last name, but didn't stick around to play the role of a father. In fact, he would remain a ghost figure throughout her life, and Sophia only met him 3 times in total, and each meeting left emotional wounds that never fully healed. Sophia's mother, Romilda, had her own dreams once. She had been a talented piano player and a former beauty queen. In fact, she won a national Greta Garbo look-alike contest and was offered a Hollywood screen test, an offer she declined because her strict parents wouldn't allow her to leave Italy. That missed opportunity would haunt Sophia's mother for years, and instead of chasing stardom, she spent her life sacrificing for her daughters. When Riccardo walked away, Romilda had no financial support, no security, and no partner to help raise the children. She was left to raise Sophia and her younger daughter Maria, born years later in extreme poverty. Not in Rome, but in Pozzuoli, a small port town near Naples where Romilda's parents lived. They crammed into her family's home, 8 people under one roof, living off bread crusts and rationed goods. World War II only made things worse. Pozzuoli was heavily affected during the war, and the family often sought shelter in train tunnels just to stay alive. Food was scarce, the future was uncertain, and one day, while fleeing an air raid, a young Sophia was injured, leaving a permanent scar that she would later work hard to hide on screen. But at the time, there was no makeup or camera angles, and Sophia had to survive in a world that didn't seem to want her. Despite the hardship, Sophia's mom pushed on, doing whatever she could to keep her daughters clothed and fed. She passed down her love of music and cinema to Sophia, often telling her that she was meant for something greater. But dreams didn't pay the bills. To survive, the family sold homemade cherry liquor on the street, sometimes mixed with whatever ingredients they could find. They bartered with neighbors, shared what little they had, and prayed for the war to end. Sophia herself had to grow up fast. By the time she was a teenager, she was waiting tables at a local bar, while Romilda played the piano for American GIs stationed nearby. They hoped to earn tips, anything that could buy a meal or important supplies. These early experiences gave Sophia a thick skin and a sense of discipline. She watched American films, admired stars like Rita Hayworth and Greta Garbo, and imagined a life far away from the rubble of post-war Italy. In 1950, when she was just 15 years old, Sophia entered the Miss Italia beauty pageant. She didn't win the main crown, but she did take home a title that fit her perfectly: Miss Elegance. The contest marked a turning point. It was the moment when someone other than her mother saw something special in her. That same year, she landed small roles as an extra in Italian films, but the real big break hadn't come yet. To improve her skills, Sophia enrolled in Italy's National Film School. It was a bold move because many saw acting as a risky career, especially for a girl from such a poor background. But Sophia took the work seriously. She practiced her diction, studied the camera, and took on small parts in films like La Favorita. Although the roles were minor, they were steps forward, each one bringing her closer to the life she dreamed of. The most pivotal moment in Sophia's early career came when she caught the attention of Carlo Ponti, a prominent Italian film producer. Ponti wasn't just any producer. He had an eye for talent and knew how to shape careers. He saw something in Sophia that others had missed, and he didn't just offer her roles, he took charge of building her into a star. One of the first steps was to change her name. Sophia Loren sounded too ordinary for international fame. And so, inspired by Swedish actress Märta Thoren, she adopted the name Sophia Loren, a name that would soon be known around the world. Carlo didn't stop there. He helped her refine her screen presence, taught her how to work the press, and ensured that she only accepted roles that would enhance her image because it wasn't just about acting. It was about becoming a brand. By the mid-1950s, Sophia was starring in bigger productions, both in Italy and abroad. She had the looks, the talent, and now the right connections. Hollywood finally noticed her when she signed a 5-picture deal with Paramount Pictures in 1958. From there, her career skyrocketed. Sophia won acclaim for her performances, including an Academy Award for Best Actress, the first ever given for a non-English performance. She became a global icon, admired for both her acting and her resilience. But behind the designer dresses, things weren't as smooth as they looked on camera. She had survived war, poverty, rejection, and hunger. She had walked into fame with her head held high, elegant and defiant. But when it came to love, the world wasn't ready for the choices she made. The Forbidden Affair. When Sophia Loren was just 16 years old, she met Carlo Ponti, the man who would change the course of her entire life, not just professionally, but emotionally, legally, and spiritually. He was almost twice her age, and at the time, he was in his late 30s and already married. But none of that stopped the connection that began forming between them. Their first meeting wasn't romantic, it was business. Carlo instantly spotted potential in the young Sophia. He believed she had the it factor, and he wasn't wrong, but it wasn't just her talent that caught his attention. It was something deeper. Sophia had a quiet strength and a fire beneath the surface. And so, Carlo offered to mentor her and to help guide her into the film industry. But over time, it became clear that their relationship wasn't just about work. As her career started gaining momentum, so did the rumors. Italy was conservative at the time, deeply Catholic, and heavily traditional. The idea of a teenage girl being groomed by a married man didn't sit well with the public. But Sophia didn't care. She wasn't interested in being anyone's respectable role model. In fact, she had fallen in love. And although Carlo was also deeply in love, there was a problem. He couldn't divorce his wife because divorce was illegal in Italy. That meant that even if Carlo wanted to be with Sophia publicly, the law wouldn't allow it. They were trapped in a strange limbo. Together, but not allowed to be together. Things took a different turn. In 1957, Sophia met the charming Cary Grant while filming The Pride and the Passion in Spain. Cary was at the height of his career, handsome, famous, and incredibly charismatic. He was also very married at the time, although that didn't stop the chemistry between him and Sophia from boiling over. They fell for each other quickly, and according to Sophia, Cary wanted her to marry him. In fact, some reports say he begged her to leave Carlo, telling her how much he loved her and how he would give her the world if she agreed. But Sophia didn't say yes. Even though she cared deeply for Cary, her heart and her loyalty belonged to Carlo. She later admitted that saying no to Grant was one of the hardest decisions she ever made. But in her own words, that would have meant my leaving Carlo and creating a huge scandal. By then, the situation had become more than just a love triangle. It was a legal and political minefield. Ponti still couldn't get a divorce in Italy. So, in 1957, the couple pulled off a bold move. They got married by proxy in Mexico. That meant they didn't even attend the ceremony, and lawyers stood in for them. Legally, on paper, they were husband and wife. But not in Italy. The Italian government accused Ponti of bigamy. The Catholic Church condemned the relationship. Tabloids exploded with gossip. Headlines screamed about the actress and the married man in hiding. Sophia and Carlo faced the threat of criminal charges, and the situation got so tense that they had to go into exile. They left Italy and settled in France, quietly trying to live a normal life while the legal storm played out back home. For years, Sophia continued acting, flying between countries, appearing in films, and smiling for cameras. But behind the scenes, the pressure was suffocating. It wasn't until 1966, nearly a decade after their first marriage attempt, that they finally found peace. Carlo obtained French citizenship, which allowed him to legally divorce his first wife in France. Then, at last, he and Sophia had a second legal wedding. This time, it was real, recognized, and official. They stayed married for the rest of his life. But during that long exile, Sophia paid a price. She was followed constantly by the press. Every dress she wore, every man she stood next to, and every smile she gave was twisted into headlines. Some tabloids said she was a homewrecker. Others called her a fool for turning down Cary Grant. Even after marrying Ponti, the whispers never really stopped. In later interviews, Sophia admitted that there were days she questioned everything. She wondered if the scandal, the exile, and the loneliness were worth it. She never forgot Cary Grant, but she never regretted choosing Carlo either. It wasn't about choosing the most famous man or the easiest path. It was about choosing someone who believed in her before anyone else did. Someone who had helped her become the woman the world would one day admire. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real, and in the end, it lasted. Still, the emotional toll, the legal chaos, and the relentless judgment would follow her for years. And even as she tried to settle into married life, Italy wasn't done with her yet. And soon, Sophia Loren would find herself not on a movie set, but on trial. Legal battles. By the time Sophia Loren hit the peak of her fame, she had conquered nearly everything that once held her back, including poverty, rejection, scandal, and exile. But even with all the awards and admiration in the world, she still couldn't outrun the law. Sophia's problems with the Italian legal system came back to haunt her when she least expected it. By the early 1980s, she had long been recognized as a global icon, an Oscar-winning actress, a wife, and a respected figure in both Hollywood and European cinema. But in 1982, she was suddenly at the center of an international headline. This time not for a movie, or a dress, or a marriage scandal, but for tax evasion. The Italian authorities accused her of filing an incorrect tax return from the year 1974. According to them, she owed a significant amount of unpaid taxes. Sophia insisted it was a mistake by her tax accountants, not an intentional act of fraud. But Italy didn't see it that way. Despite multiple appeals and legal motions, Sophia was convicted and sentenced to 30 days in prison. She ended up serving 17 days in the women's section of the Caserta prison, just outside Naples. The experience was surreal. One of the most glamorous women in the world was now in a prison cell. Some reports say she slept on a basic metal bed, wore a plain uniform, and followed the same daily routine as the other inmates. But Sophia didn't complain. She later said she used the time to reflect and even to lose a bit of weight. trying to make the best of a humiliating situation. And although she stayed graceful in public, the experience left scars. She was hurt, embarrassed, and betrayed by her own country. The story didn't end there. Sophia spent years fighting to clear her name, and in 2013, several decades later, Italy's Supreme Court finally overturned the conviction, declaring that she had never actually committed tax fraud. But by then, the damage had been done. The world had already seen the photos of her walking into court, the prison doors closing behind her. And that wasn't the only legal battle Sophia had to face. In 1999, she took a very different kind of fight to the courts. At age 65, long retired from playing bombshells on screen, she discovered that over 79 adult websites were using digitally altered and fake photos with her face on them. It was disgusting, disrespectful, and completely unauthorized. And Sophia sued all of them, demanding they take down the images and pay damages. She didn't need the money. What she wanted was respect and to protect her name, especially for the sake of her sons. Her message was clear. She may have played sensual characters, but that didn't give anyone the right to exploit her image. Behind the scenes, her husband, Carlo Ponti, was also no stranger to legal chaos. Even before they married, Carlo had a complicated relationship with power and censorship in Italy. Back in World War II, when Italy was under fascist rule, Ponti was briefly imprisoned for producing an anti-German film. At a time when speaking out, or even hinting at criticism, was dangerous, Carlo had chosen to take the risk. And that decision nearly cost him his freedom. Decades later, he found himself under fire again. This time, it was for producing the film Massacre in Rome, which starred Richard Burton and depicted a dark chapter in history. But what made the film controversial was its portrayal of the Pope. Some interpreted the movie as suggesting the Pope had failed to speak out strongly against the massacre, and the backlash was swift. Carlo was charged with defaming the image of the Pope. The Catholic Church was furious. Religious groups called for a ban. Politicians took sides. But after pressure from international human rights groups and filmmakers, the charges were eventually dropped. Still, it wasn't the first or the last time Carlo and Sophia would be caught between art, politics, and morality. In many ways, they were a couple that constantly tested the limits of what Italy was willing to tolerate. Sometimes they won. Other times, the price was exile. And while Sophia smiled for the cameras and posed on red carpets, she carried these legal battles with her like invisible luggage that was always there, always heavy, but rarely spoken about in public. But perhaps the most painful struggle Sophia ever faced wasn't in a courtroom or a prison cell. It happened in silence, behind closed doors, in hospital rooms, in doctors' offices, and in whispered prayers. Because no amount of fame, beauty, or strength could shield her from the heartbreak that came with wanting something she wasn't sure she could have. The private battle for motherhood. Sophia Loren was known to the world as a goddess of the screen, but behind the scenes, she was quietly fighting for something much more personal: the chance to become a mother. And that battle was far more heartbreaking than most people ever knew. In the 1960s, after years of public scandal and private exile, Sophia finally settled into a stable life with her husband, Carlo Ponti. They were legally married, living in France, and her career was still flourishing. But deep down, all Sophia wanted was something the spotlight couldn't give her: a child. What followed were two devastating miscarriages. The first happened early in her marriage, and then it happened again. At a time when women in the spotlight were expected to smile through everything, Sophia was grieving silently, away from the cameras, behind closed doors. She later spoke about the emotional toll it took on her. Each pregnancy had felt like a gift, and each loss, like a piece of her heart, had been torn away. She blamed the stress of her career, the travel, and the public pressure. Doctors offered advice, from rest to medication and even patience, but nothing worked. So finally, when she became pregnant again in the early 1970s, Sophia made a bold decision to walk away from the spotlight. She stepped back from acting, from premieres, and from everything. She left behind the scripts, the cameras, and the glamorous gowns, and moved to Geneva, Switzerland, where she could focus entirely on carrying her child to term. Sophia spent much of her pregnancy on bed rest, under constant medical supervision, and she followed every instruction to the letter. She read, wrote in journals, listened to classical music, and visualized a healthy birth. The world was still calling her name, but she didn't care, because to her, nothing was more important than becoming a mother. And finally, in December 1968, her prayers were answered. Her first son, Carlo Ponti Jr., was born, and 4 years later, she gave birth to her second son, Edoardo Ponti. To the public, these may have seemed like small life events compared to Oscars and film premieres, but to Sophia, they were her greatest achievements. She often said that being a mother was the role she had always wanted to play, and it was the only one she never had to rehearse. Sophia's career would never be the same after her children arrived, and she was perfectly fine with that because she chose motherhood over fame. She became a fiercely protective parent, doing everything she could to keep her sons out of the spotlight and give them a normal life. Her sons would grow up surrounded by culture, music, cinema, and languages, but also by deep love and emotional grounding. And they turned out very different from each other, in ways that only made her love them more. Carlo Ponti Jr., her firstborn, grew into a reserved and quiet man who didn't chase the spotlight and didn't care for celebrity attention. Instead, he found his passion in music. He became a conductor, working with major orchestras around the world and earning a reputation for being incredibly disciplined and introspective. Like his father, Carlo Jr. had a calm strength and a refined creative mind. Sophia has revealed that she admires his seriousness and his ability to disappear into music and lead with grace. Edoardo Ponti, on the other hand, was a different kind of spirit. He was outgoing, expressive, and emotionally open. Sophia once said that Edoardo reminded her of her younger sister Maria, who was full of life, artistic, emotional, and always dreaming. He didn't become an actor, but he fell in love with film, not in front of the camera, but behind it. Edoardo became a director and screenwriter, working in both Hollywood and Europe. But more importantly, he became a storyteller. Sophia and Edoardo shared a unique bond that went far beyond mother and son. She was his inspiration, and he was her safe space. He understood her like no one else did. They talked about art, about emotion, about pain and survival. He once said that his mother wasn't just an icon, but a symbol of strength, and everything he did as a filmmaker was to honor her legacy. Through the years, Sophia rarely opened up about her personal struggles in interviews, but when she did, it was always her children she spoke about with the most emotion, not her career or even her love life. She called motherhood her anchor, and the one thing that kept her grounded when everything else felt chaotic. She had spent her own childhood abandoned by her father, scarred by war, and raised in uncertainty. And so, she was determined that her children would never know that kind of fear. They would have stability. They would have loved it, and they would know who their mother truly was behind the fame. For Sophia, the battle to become a mother had nearly broken her, but the reward was worth every tear, because in the end, it wasn't the red carpets or the gold statues that defined her. It was the quiet moments, and through all the decades, the public only saw glimpses of those memories, until one of her sons decided to pull back the curtain. After so many years, Edoardo Ponti, the boy who had grown up watching his mother turn pain into power, had something to say. It was a tribute, a revelation, and a side of Sophia Loren the world had never truly seen. The tribute that revealed it all. In 2020, the world saw Sophia Loren return to the screen after more than a decade away. But this wasn't just a comeback, it was deeply personal. Sophia's son, Edoardo Ponti, had written and directed a film that would not only bring his mother back to acting, but would also reveal something far more intimate: who she really was behind the camera, behind the name, behind the legend. The film was titled The Life Ahead. Sophia played Madame Rosa, an aging Holocaust survivor who takes in a troubled Senegalese orphan. It was a heavy role that was emotional and raw, but that's exactly why she took it. For Sophia, the character of Rosa was deeply connected to her own past. Rosa had survived war, just like she had. Rosa had scars she never talked about, just like Sophia. And Rosa had created a quiet, complicated world in which love had to be earned and protected at all costs. But the deeper story was not just what happened on screen. It was what Edoardo revealed about his mother in the process of making the film. In interviews surrounding the release, Edoardo spoke openly, more than ever before, about what it was like growing up with a woman the world considered untouchable. And what he shared was both surprising and deeply moving. He described Sophia not as a celebrity, but as a completely devoted mother. Someone who sacrificed enormous parts of her fame and career to give her children a normal life. Someone who intentionally stepped away from film at various points, not because the roles weren't good, but because her sons needed her more. He also revealed that for years, he had wanted to direct her in a film. But Sophia kept turning him down. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she had long ago lost interest in chasing the screen. She had already done everything an actress could possibly do, and she had nothing to prove. What changed her mind for The Life Ahead was the story. And of course, the director. She trusted Edoardo completely. She knew he wouldn't ask her to perform for the sake of attention. This project was different, and the result was a performance that stunned critics. Sophia received widespread praise for her portrayal of Madame Rosa, and the role earned her a David di Donatello Award, Italy's highest film honor, and even sparked early Oscar buzz, though she was ultimately not nominated. More important than any award, though, was the dynamic between mother and son. Edoardo spoke about the experience with a kind of reverence and how directing his mother forced him to see her in a new way. Not just as a parent or a performer, but as a woman who had lived through more pain and strength than most people would ever understand. He admitted that during filming, there were moments he had to stop. Not because of the technical details, but because watching her act out Rosa's pain felt too close to home. More than once during the press tour, Edoardo described his mother as his moral compass, someone whose strength had shaped him far more than any script or film school ever could. In fact, in an interview, he said, "In my life, if I could only work with one actress, I would work with my mother, again and again and again. Not only has she given me life, but she has also given me beautiful work in my films. And it is just a joy to work with somebody I can not only call my mother, but also my friend and professional partner." And Sophia, in turn, said that working with Edoardo was one of the proudest moments of her life. She didn't need the world to see her again, but she was glad they got to see what her son saw. The woman who had loved, lost, endured, and triumphed. The woman who had raised her sons with quiet dignity, far from flashing cameras. The woman who had once sold liquor in Pozzuoli survived the aftermath of war and then stood her ground on the world's biggest stages. This film wasn't just a tribute to her acting, it was a tribute to her humanity. And for the first time, through Edoardo's lens, the world finally saw all of her. Would you want to see more of Sophia Loren on the big screen? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.